Welcome to Clay Mastermind with Don Grant. Mental excellence and industry insights. Brought to you by the Clay Lab, your ultimate podcast for mastering the mental game of clay shooting and gaining exclusive insights from the top minds in the industry. Join us as we dive into the strategies of elite athletes, uncover the secrets to peak performance, and share powerful techniques to enhance your shooting skills. Plus, get behind-the-scenes access to the leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of the clay shooting industry. Get ready to elevate your game, sharpen your focus, and gain insider knowledge from the best in the business. Let's get started. Here's your host, Don Grant.
All right. Very exciting. I've got a weekend warrior here, Dan Lengyel, who is in master class. And also, you have been a student of mine for about a year. I don't even know exactly. It's been an enjoyable time getting to know you and helping you out. So I was thinking of interviewing you for the podcast so that people have someone that they can relate to that's on, similar journey to them. And I think there's a lot to learn from weekend warriors, not just the top shooters. So welcome, Dan. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So tell us who you are, Dan.
So I am 56 years old and live in North Texas. I was actually born and raised in Michigan and then made my way to Southern California just for a lifestyle change after I graduated from college, University of Michigan. And then met my wife there. We had two daughters. And when they were basically 1 and 2 years old, we decided to get out of California. And it was interesting. I was traveling at the time, and so I needed a major airport hub. And so we looked at each other and said, okay, Chicago, Denver, or Dallas. We have no preference and no family in either any of those towns. And all things being equal, we thought it was warmer in Dallas than it was in the other two. And so that's how we got here in 2005 and have been here ever since. So married for 25 years and have two daughters. One 23-year-old lives in Austin, Texas, and one 21-year-old finishing up her college career at the University of Colorado.
Very nice. Very nice. What do you do for a living?
So I have two businesses that are very much related. So one of them is that I run a multifamily office, which basically is a coordinator for wealthy families, typically multi-generational families, where they're trying to move either a business interest from one generation down to the next, or just wealth that has been created over the generations with the least amount of taxation possible, but providing control and asset protection, etc. So we call it a multifamily office because we do that for roughly 8 families as opposed to being dedicated to one family. And again, the coordination is between their legal counsel, their tax counsel, and then we generally are responsible for their asset management, the investment portion of their lives, as well as any risk management, insurance, etc. And so that's one facet of the business. And then as a result of that, I've met numerous financial advisors over the 30 years that I've been doing this. And we created a platform that allows financial advisors to interact with the clients that they choose to work with in both the asset management world, investments, and then also the risk management world, insurance. And that company is called Spectrum Financial Group. So we basically provide services for about 100 financial advisors who are on our platform as independent advisors, doing financial planning, for lack of a better term, for the clientele that they serve.
Nice. All very analytical. So we're going to
Yes,
get into that in a little bit.
very math oriented. Yes.
Yes. Very right brained. Left brain, right brain. It's left brain. That's
Okay.
when you're super analytical.
All right.
So when did you start shooting clay targets?
So, very interesting story. Again, I grew up in Michigan with a family. My dad was a fisherman, never owned a gun, never shot anything in his life. So, we weren't exposed to that as kids. And then in California, similar, meaning nobody I knew out there owned a gun, let alone shot a gun. And then I moved to Texas and got invited to my first duck hunt in 2008. And before we went out the next morning, I told them that I'd never held a shotgun, never shot a shotgun, and so they decided that they were going to teach me at least how to pull the trigger and shoot. So they had a little hand thrown trap machine out at this ranch, and they started throwing targets. And for the life of me, I probably shot at 50 targets, and I didn't hit a one of them. And then just for giggles, the guy said, "Well, maybe close your left eye and see if
Mm,
that helps." And I then started at least being able to break, maybe every other one of them. And so the point of that story is never shot a gun till 2008, learned how to shoot a shotgun with one eye closed because it was the only way I could break a bird. And then in 2017, having become really an avid duck hunter, to the point to where I was dragging decoys and all that type of stuff out into ponds, throughout North Texas. I decided I wanted to learn how to shoot with two eyes open. And so I went on the internet and I just explored, shotgun shooting, and what popped up was skeet and sporting clays. And, to his testament, probably does as good a job as anybody, at least back in the day, was Gil Ash
mhm.
and his YouTube videos on shotgun training. So they're located in Houston, Texas, about 4 hours away from my house. So I went down there and did a day clinic with Vicky Ash, actually, and a group
Nice.
of other people. And Vicky taught me in 2017 how to shoot with both eyes open in a day and a half. So I'm very grateful to her for that. She's a sweet woman, and and was the first person I met actually in this sport. And while I was there, there was this group of people who were working with her son over on another field. And they had all these fancy shotguns, and some of them with these weird stocks that had like Bondo on them and that looked really, really ugly. And I was like, well, but they were really good. They broke almost everything that they shot at.
Mm,
And I was like, well, what are those folks doing? She's like, well, those people are competitive shotgun shooters. I was like, competitive shotgun shooters? What is that? Meaning
mm,
I had seen it in the Olympics or maybe on ESPN, but I had no idea that this world even existed. And she said, well, yeah, they compete, almost every weekend somewhere around Texas or nationally, regionally, etc. And I said, you got to be kidding me. But I was intrigued by that. So I did some more research. And that year in 2017, the Browning Briley was
mm.
held a place in Teague, Texas, that no longer is open to the public. I think they actually had a US Open one year, but it was horrific that it rained like crazy and everything got flooded.
I was
Um,
there.
Caney Creek, I think that was it. You were there? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I heard the horror stories of Caney Creek, but they held a Browning Briley, and so I called Vicky and I said, "Hey, I think I'm going to go shoot this tournament." She said, "Well, just sign up for the main and just go have." And so I did. I signed up for the main, and on the first day, I shot a 37 out of 100. And I was like, "My gosh, this is crazy hard. These people are really, really good." Because I could kill ducks,
Mhm.
but when put to the test on a competitive course, you know, I couldn't break 40%. And so that started the competitive juices flowing. And then from there, I decided I needed some instruction. So I remember I took a lesson with Brad Kidd as he was traveling around North Texas. And then somebody had told me about Dan Carlisle. So Dan really was the guy that I worked with almost every month. I would see him
Mhm.
for, 3 to 4 hours. We'd meet up somewhere in North Texas. And he was the guy who taught me how to and I still see, Dan to this day, and take, an intermittent lesson from him. He's become a good friend. I love him to death as a person, but I have also then taken lessons from people who really kind of came off the Dan Carlisle tree. So whether that's, Brian Hughes up in Oklahoma City or Will Fennell, taking lessons from Will, and then obviously Anthony Matarese. And, I probably spend more time for sure with Anthony at this point in my career than I do any of the others, but it all grew out of that Dan Carlisle system.
Very cool. Very cool. So, have you been evolving? What are your recent accomplishments?
Yeah, so I started out in, I guess, D class, maybe it was E class, and then punched my way up. Probably took me a solid 3 years. Maybe I'm a slow learner. I don't know. So, till about 2020 to where I felt like I was competitive. And then, at that point, finally busted into maybe 2021, busted into master class. However, back then they didn't have the two-tier system for sub gauge, so a lot of my punches came from actually shooting 20 and 28 gauge events. Really
Mm.
am fond of 28 gauge, but it caused me to punch into master class much faster than I wanted to, especially with a 12 gauge. So as a result, I didn't punch anything at all in master class in like 22. I bounced back down to double A at the beginning of 23, and then was able in 23 to punch my way back into master class with the 12 gauge as well as on the sub gauge side. So now unfortunately I get to swim with the sharks on both sides of the fence in master class. And I guess my only claim to fame from a shooting perspective, and I'm trying to work on that resume to be sure. And I feel like I'm really at the front end of building that resume, especially now that I've gotten into veterans class this
Mhm.
year. But I was fortunate enough 2 years ago, I tied for, HOA in the 28 sub gauge at the Texas State Championship, and lost in the shoot off. So on the record, the runner up for 28 gauge Texas State Championship for 2020.
Nice. Nice.
So not bad for a weekend warrior.
No, not bad at all. Not bad at all. So, you were telling us the type of work that you do, and what I've observed, doing mental training over the years is that a lot of the folks that hire me tend to be executive level, administrative, owner, the ones that like get things done. The math minded, analytical tend to be the ones that have a hard time translating over, this if they're an entrepreneur and analytical math number cruncher, they have a hard time pulling that into clay shooting, because especially if they're the go-getter type, and if they're in charge and they make things happen. Because over there in clay shooting, you can't be super analytical. You can't force the shot. You can't make it happen. So tell me about that with your mind in clay shooting.
Yeah, so it really started very as much. Let me back up. It very much is an analytical mind, and thinks technically, building blocks. One thing leads to another, and then you get an outcome. Um, and so the challenge with that, it goes back to golf. So when I was a kid, I played golf, not super competitively, meaning not on my golf or my high school golf team, and didn't play in college by any means, but I actually was a single digit handicapper through my late teens and all of my early 20s. And I got to a point to where I decided I wanted to compete for the US amateur. And so I was going to start with the California mid amateur. But in order to do that, you had to be a two, and then you had to compete to even be able to compete in one of the qualifiers. And I was a four at the time. So I decided to change coaches and get serious about my golf game and change my swing completely. But I was working with somebody that was very mechanical, trying to get me to change my swing. And what I realized, and one of the reasons why I gave up golf, was the more analytical I got, especially as I tried to change a swing that I had been accustomed to for, 15 years, my scores skyrocketed, and I never came close to a two. In fact, candidly, I've drifted from a four, and I've never even been able to break single digit handicap since that point in time. And so, crash and failure in the golf world being highly analytical. And then
Mhm.
when I picked up shooting, I tried to do my best just to do that, naturally, kind of see it, shoot it. But the more instruction that you took, the more
Mm.
technical it became. And so I was trying to figure out, this balance between technical and free flowing, meaning that in golf, you put me on a driving range where it didn't count, meaning there's no out of bounds and you're not keeping score. I was a scratch golfer to be sure, but then you put me on a course on a tee box where there's actually boundaries and it means something. And, I couldn't break 80. So it was like,
Mhm.
what is going on? So the same thing started to happen in shooting, meaning that as I got better, I started to get more technical and I would do perfect practicing, meaning, like most people, hardly miss a target when you're just out there practicing because they don't count. But then when it did count, even on a local 1 day tournament on a Saturday, I noticed that I was shooting in the 70s and then broke my way into the 80s, but it really was a slow, slow goal. And trying to break my way into the 90s, and where it really came to light, this whole idea of analytical and getting rid of it, and truly what led me to you was shooting charity shoots. As I got better and I started, scratching 90 on a local 1 day shoot around town, I went to a charity shoot and, I'd shoot like a 94 or a 96, or, maybe if I was having a good day, I'd shoot a 98, but never ran a charity event. And I said to myself, I'm like, okay, well, you know how to shoot, and all of these targets are breakable or hittable.
Mhm.
And so what's going on? It must be mental, meaning it's not mechanical. Everybody can break these birds. And so why aren't you shooting 100? It's definitely mental. And that literally led me to you, which was, okay, if I can figure out a way to break 100 straight in a charity event, I'm certainly going to be a better performer on the weekends when it actually counts. And as I've gone to, these regional events, the 3 and 4 day events, the US Open, National Championship, World Sporting, World Feed Task. So I am traveling and competing in all of these larger shoots. I figured the only way I was going to be able to have an edge on the field, who had been shooting for their whole life and was really good at it, was if I could become a master of the mental game. And so that's this
Mhm.
new pursuit that I'm on. Is my secret weapon, as I call it, is Don Grant, and figuring out, a guy who can go shoot charity events and consistently run the course, just simply because mentally I'm engaged at a different level than all of my counterparts.
And how's that working for you?
So since we've started, can claim that to fame, it's only happened once, but I was at a charity shoot down in Houston. Actually, a client of mine invited me to go to a shoot that they were sponsoring, Greater Houston, and I want to say that that was probably February or March of this year, and I have my first 100 under my belt at a charity shoot. I haven't shot as many as I probably should have in order to continue to test that theory, but the ones that I have competed in, the scores are all north of 95, and again, I finally straighted a course, which I consider to be a huge, huge accomplishment. And it really has significantly impacted in a very favorable way my competitive shooting. I'm still, in the mid 80s. I might scratch, a 90 in a preliminary event, etc. But I'm working on that next pinnacle, if you will, to consistently shoot in the 90s at these larger events would be a huge feat and accomplishment.
Yeah. So what would you say like drives you and motivates you and keeps you coming back for more?
It's just a natural competitive spirit. So Um, it was interesting when I was a kid growing up playing sports, and I played hockey. I skated competitively all the way up till college, and then played intramural pickup basketball, that type of stuff. And I was always one of those kids that never understood why, if you had three timeouts left at the end of a half, let's say in basketball, you know, why the coach, unless you were down 20 or 30 points, but why wasn't the coach, calling the timeouts? Meaning,
Mm.
use everything at your disposal to your advantage to try and win. And I heard Anthony Matarese say that one time, and actually he repeated it on your podcast, which I thought was awesome. But he was the one that really brought it to light as of late, which was, he said, if I can't be first, I want to be second. And if I can't be second, I want to be third. And if I can't be third, I want to be fourth. And, he said it, I think, a little differently on your podcast, which was, if I can't shoot, 95, I want to shoot a 94. If I can't shoot a 94, I want to shoot a 93. And that fit perfectly with this mentality of utilizing all your timeouts, or you're never out
Mm.
of it until the final buzzer rings. And if you can stay competitive to the very last second, you're going to end up beating a lot of people who mail it in, or, give up, or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And I have seen that a lot in shooting, where, people will shoot and they don't get off to a great start, and they miss too many birds, and they'll shoot from the hip or something. And I'm like, why would you shoot from the hip in a competitive event? You're not maximizing the odds that you're breaking that target. And if people go back and listen to Anthony's podcast with you,
Mhm.
he's got his own thoughts as to you, as to why people do that. Just, it's easier to mail it in and accept that consequence than try as hard as you
Mhm.
might.
Mhm.
But for me, if I'm going to show up, I want to try as hard as I possibly can to compete and come out on top. And I'm blessed to have a couple of other weekend warriors who grew up around shooting, who are pretty good, that I've become friends with. And so they really drive me, which is, if they're consistently shooting in the 90s, and they're actually winning events, maybe side events or a sub gauge event at a state shoot or a regional event, I'm like, well, they've got a day job too, and
Mhm.
they just grew up shooting doves and I didn't. But why shouldn't I be able to score as well, if not better than them, especially with all the time and energy I'm putting into training, both on the technical side of it with lessons, as well as on the mental side of it with you. So that really is my motivation, is to outperform every other weekend warrior out there, and then do my best to start scratching away at the people who actually do this for a living.
Nice, nice. I love it. So, what would you say for you have been your primary challenges along that journey, or that you're even still facing in this journey of your shooting?
So, one of the things that I've learned from you, there's two key things, but one of those is this whole concept of the channels that our conscious mind likes to work in. And unfortunately, six of those are not productive or conducive for operating at peak performance. And only one of them, being completely present, that's one of those channels, as you know, is really where people need to be in order to perform at their peak. So what I realized, as I looked at my own life, is that just in daily life, I spent a lot of time in those other non-productive channels, whether it was, thinking about the future, which typically is fear-based, worrying, it was regret, thinking about the past, it was daydreaming, it was trying too hard, all of those things. I was like, wow, I spend 95% of my day, whether it's in business or it's in shooting, in these other channels, and very, very little time, being present, and even in my personal life.
Mhm.
And so, the big aha was that, well, while the conscious mind tends to spend a lot of time in non productive places, it is controllable, and we're the only ones that are responsible for the outcome. Meaning, if you're allowing yourself to be in those six channels, that's exactly what you're doing, is you're permitting that to happen. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to happen. And so in order to be a better shooter and to get a better result based by or judged by score, not how I feel, did I feel connected to the bird, not did I see the birds better today or not, but it was just eliminating all of the chatter in my conscious mind to be present as much as I possibly could, especially while I was competing, and to turn off those other channels. And then, the other thing that I learned from you was the mental part of it is very much related to a lot of other aspects of our lives. And what I mean by that is, you think of mental as being your brain and just controlling your thoughts. Well, it's much easier to control your thoughts when you are eating healthy, you're exercising. You and Anthony talked about that too. I don't know how
Mhm.
somebody couldn't be in a good place in their personal life and in order to be productive in their shooting life. And for me, what that means is, okay, as a 56-year-old man, am I physically fit as much as I want to be? No. Okay, well, what are you doing to make that better? So, can you eat better, which leads to better sleep? Instead of going out at a shoot and having, 4 or 5 beers, or maybe more with some of the people that I hang out with, and treating it like a social event, which it absolutely has the opportunity to be that. But you wake up the next morning kind of, knocking your head going, okay, let's get the cobwebs out and let's go break some targets.
Mhm.
But what you realize is that it's more challenging to be present if you're not taking care of your whole self. And so what I love about your program is not only is it a mental program related to shooters or golfers or athletes, but if somebody just wanted to improve their overall life, truthfully, if you drink more than you want to be drinking, you can change that. If you're doing something like smoking or whatever, clearly you can change that. If you want to eat better, you can change that. If you want to exercise more, you can change that. If you want to be more present with your wife and your kids, you can change that. And the coolest thing is I'm in this place right now where working with you, and you can hopefully hear the excitement in my voice. It's I'm becoming a better shooter by hopefully becoming a better person
Mhm.
and a better spouse, a better father, a better friend, a better shooter. And then all of that flows over into work too, which is, you can become a better boss, a better owner, a better advisor to your clients. All of those things are completely interrelated. So that was a surprise, meaning I hadn't planned on that going in.
Mhm.
I only was worried about the score getting better. Um, and what I found is that, you know, the score can get a lot better, but really the way that the score gets better is with your life getting better. And that's been a phenomenal outcome, an unexpected outcome from this relationship and your program that, is game changing.
It's like that commercial, the Amex commercial with it's priceless, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The my background is in psychology and in helping people with a private practice and all these other things. So when athletes first started coming to me, they were here and there, and eventually it just started taking over. So I say that because I didn't just start in as a sports psychologist or somebody who wanted to help athletes. I was a person who was helping people. And so when the athletes started taking over my schedule, I was like, well, what about this part of me that just still wants to help people? And I realized, when the athlete calls and they want to know if I can help them, they only want to know if I can help them win. Right? They're struggling in their sport. Can you help me win? And I'm like, yes. But I already know that there's so much more to it, and it's all these things that you're talking about, but they don't wanna hear that on the front end, and none of my marketing says that. In the last, because 'cause I've been working with clay shooters practically full time since, like, 2009, the rumor's gotten out there. So now people know that I help with more than just the clay shooting. I help with the life also. And some people think that's silly and it's ridiculous. And how is that going to help them with clay shooting? Which is fine. They can think that because they just don't understand. But to explain it just real briefly, You can't do something on Saturday at 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. if you don't know how to do it as a human. Meaning, how are you going to focus on Saturday? How are you going to not be upset with a miss? How are you going to, get away from trying too hard or overthinking or anger outbursts, tantrums and frustrations and lack of confidence? Like, you can't just wish for that or think, okay, I'll do that on Saturday at the competition. Like, you have to learn how to be that way. And then I tell my clients, your practice field is your life. You want to practice your mechanics on the course, but you practice your mental game in life. And then there's this win-win that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And you're spot on, meaning, when I first came to you, it was all about winning. And you and I never even talked about, the other aspects of my life and, was it healthy? Was it unhealthy, et cetera. But in order to be able, to control your conscious mind, you realize that it, you need to stack these things in your favor. And by getting more sleep, um, eating again better, drinking a lot less, um, we become better human beings to be sure. But the byproduct is that you become a better shooter. And then the other thing I'd say relative to the program for those people that are listening, one of the key takeaways for me as I've been working with you, Don, is the emphasis on what I'll call the post shot routine. So, there's a lot of talk about pre-shot routines out there, which again are very mechanical. And coming from the golf world, we're used to that. You see it every
Mm-hmm.
Saturday and Sunday if you're watching TV in the PGA Tour or the LPGA, where they do exactly the same thing before they take a swing for the most part. And there's a lot of that carryover into the sporting clay world. Well, I think that's critically important to be sure, but sometimes if you get so focused on those mechanics, that can actually become a mental impediment as well, because you're too focused on all of those steps in a pre-shot routine. But in a post shot routine, what was so cool about that, and I've heard people like Wendell Cherry talk about post shot routine in some of the podcasts that he's done, over the years. I've listened to pretty much anybody who has taken the time and willing to share,
Mm-hmm.
online with someone, all of the greatest pros that we have in this sport. But what I learned from you was whether it was after a pair or it's after a stand or it's after a round or it's after an event, the whole idea of consciously thinking about what went well, what didn't go so well. If you missed a bird, why did you miss that bird? And then what can you be doing proactively in the moment in order to get a different result on the very next pair, or for sure the very next stand, or for sure the very next event, or on a bigger level, the very next tournament. Meaning, if I went to a tournament and I didn't perform well, again, how well did I rest? How many birds in a day did I shoot? What did I do to nourish myself? How often did I eat? How well did I hydrate? How much alcohol did I consume? All those things. But it all breaks down from the bigger picture, evaluating the event, to again the particular prelim or main, to a particular stand, to a particular pair. And it's given me, well, let me say it this way, it's empowered me so much from the standpoint of saying, if I miss a pair in a stand, I can, at that very moment, have control over a different outcome on the next pair if I just realize what didn't I do right, what did I do wrong, and what did I do right. Because we know from all these great teachers, that I've had the luxury of taking lessons from for years now, what to do. And if a
Mm-hmm.
bird doesn't break, you just didn't do something you were supposed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and it's fixable. And so, that's been a huge, huge takeaway. And I think what you do very differently than a lot of the teachers out there is the amount of time and emphasis you spend on that post shot routine,
Mm-hmm.
which again becomes the first step in being very proactive to getting a more positive outcome either immediately or at the next, regional event or whatever it may be.
Yeah, in my program, my 21 lesson program, which is also an online course, pre-shot is not till lesson 21. And for years, athletes would get upset about that. They'd be like, I want you to help me with my pre-shot. I want you to help me with my pre-shot. When does the pre-shot lesson? And I would always put them off and put them off and put them off. And you get to lesson like something like 17 or 18, and I'm teaching you a post segment. Post, I say segment because it's a segment of time, like post station, post round, post event. I teach the post first because I honestly feel, other than station one, the post is feeding in to the pre on the next station. So if you miss targets on station one and you don't know how to process that information in your mind, then you're going to carry that over into the next station and, repeat all the way through. So I do emphasize the post first, and then I go into what I call the intermission sequence. So, what are you doing between pairs, which is tricky, but what are you doing between stations, between events? And then I hold off to the end for the pre-shot, which by the time they get to that, they already understand all the puzzle pieces, or let's say all the ingredients for the recipe, and it all just slips right into place. So you mentioned that Wendell talks about the post. Wendell and I started working together back in like 2009, and he worked with me for like 5 years. So he not only was he already open to the mental game, meaning I didn't have to convince him much. He was more receptive than just say the average person and believing in that. But he's been a huge advocate and student of and believing in what I teach, and definitely hear that in when he's talking on a podcast or he's talking to students. And him and I are working together again now, and actually he's going to be one of the next podcasts here. So but it's funny, just to rewind a little bit on, you mentioned what Anthony and I talked about, and then how this mental training has affected you as a human and your peak performance as a human. I was working with like John Woolley, and he was sending me students. This was like, again, like 2008, 2009. And Wendell had heard about it, and he sent in a student of his to try it out first. He like sent him in so that that student could then give feedback. So I don't know, what do you call that? Like sending a little tester in or something like that. And
The
that,
reconnaissance team.
yeah, that's exactly what happened. And so I didn't know this was happening at the time. So I'm working with this person, we're doing private sessions, and he had this experience where he had traveled out of town and pumped some gas in his car and left his credit card and got down the road or whatever, and had said to me that would have normally just pissed me off. I would have been upset for a long time. And he was actually amazed at himself, at how calm he was. And, even calling his wife and telling her, what was going on, he was like calmer than he normally would be. And she was observing this not only in that particular situation, but in other things in life, in their relationships and things, even the way somebody reacts if they didn't shoot well that day. They can come home and kick the dog. And if, the stock market's not going the way they want, or their business or whatever. And so she had been observing how much he was changing for the positive. And she had told Ann Cherry. So Anne and this woman, this wife, were the two that were like, this is good stuff. And Anne is the one that got Wendell to do the program. So it was the wives. It was the wives that were like, this is good. And there's positive change all around, and like I was saying earlier, you can't just wish to be calmer and more focused and more present and confident on Saturday. Like, you have to learn to be that way as a human, and it does pay off in all these different ways, like relationships and work and everything.
To be sure. And I think if more women knew about it, they'd probably encourage their male partners. to get more involved because it does pay huge dividends. The other thing that's unique about your program is whether you call it meditation or hypnosis. And for me, I think of meditation basically just being as the equivalent of self hypnosis. And so,
Mhm.
that's the other thing that you do is you teach people essentially, how to calm our minds, in the moment. There's so much noise and chatter and
Mhm.
stress in daily life. Let alone, when we're shooting, and it's heightened when we're shooting. If we bring that stress upon ourselves because it's a competitive environment. That said, um, a huge takeaway is that component of it, which is being able, to put yourself into a meditative state, before an event, and to some degree, even, during an event, um, etc., which is amazing as to not only how much better do you perform when you're in a calm state and then being present at the same time, even things like, sleeping. And so, to lay down in bed, if it normally takes a cocktail to put you to sleep. It's amazing that, well, you can set the cocktail down and, and actually meditate before you go to bed and sleep a lot better. And somebody once told me, a friend of mine, who grew up in a family of, people who overconsumed to the point to where, it became debilitating in their lives. I think a lot of people, do that and they're still functioning, so they continue to do it. But in her case, it was debilitating for her family members. And so she told her story that, she didn't want to do that, meaning she wanted to figure out a way to dull the pain
Mhm.
without dulling the joy. And substances, whether it's drugs, it's alcohol, or whatever, they may dull the pain, but they definitely dull the joy as well. And,
Mhm.
the coolest thing about this program and things like it, people who have found, meditation, I think what they would all tell you is it's a very, very healthy way to dull the pain because it does not dull the joy. In fact,
Mhm.
candidly, it can increase the joy. And so, that's an additional benefit outcome, of this program, to be sure. But, just that lifestyle, in and of itself. And it's really been eye-opening, and again, very, very rewarding from the standpoint to know that, um, you know, the easiest way to become a better shooter is really to become, a better person, and a healthier person. When I say better person, I just mean overall health, and the value of being present, with other people and just in nature and all of those things. It's it's super, super cool. And, unfortunately, before I got personally exposed to it by, um, going through your program and hiring you, the problem is that you don't hear a lot about that. And like you said, some
Mhm.
other people might even think it's weird. And, maybe they do, but I wish someday maybe their eyes would get open to think that it's not so weird, because, the positive impact significantly outweigh any of the weirdness.
Mhm. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. You
No,
know,
very true.
when I was actively, seeing other kinds of clients besides athletes, there were multiple that had come in specifically to quit drinking alcohol, to quit drinking 2 bottles of wine every night, to quit drugs, to quit marijuana, to quit chewing. There's a lot of different addictions that I've helped people with. And most of them, when they would come out of their hypnosis, they would be like, wow, that's that feeling I've been chasing. And, that feeling in the hypnosis meditation is what they thought they were chasing by drinking or doing drugs. And, it felt euphoric. It felt great. There's peace in true when you truly know how to do hypnosis or meditation. There's a lot of peace because a big part of it is your conscious mind is quiet and there's no chatter. So, which, as you've learned, that's the culprit. Like, that's the stinker that's causing all these problems. And so, and a clay shooter knows the chatter. Like that's something that comes up in conversations between clay shooters, and there, there's all different kinds of chatter depending on the personality of the person and whatever their own personal issues are, or hangups or beliefs. Um, but so yeah, that chatter, if you are naturally quieting that when you're doing hypnosis or meditation, then there is peace there. And the cool thing is that science has caught up and has said, like, the zone state, the flow state, that peak performance state for athletes is what we call alpha. And alpha is exactly light hypnosis. Like theta is deeper hypnosis, but when they've done studies on the brain of top performing athletes, that in that moment of peak performance, they're in alpha. So that's fairly new information. And I'd already been recognizing the similarities because of being a hypnotist and working with athletes for 20 years or something. I'd already been seeing these parallels, and that's what you're referencing. And it is a great state of mind, not only to bring about peace, to help you to go to sleep at night, to have more joy in your life, meaning you're not having all those negative cruddy thoughts that make you feel horrible, and then you're not having all the cruddy thoughts that make you have less than ideal performance. So it's really cool.
No, very, very much so.
So back to specifically your mechanics, how often do you practice?
So at this point, I'm out at least 2 days a week. I belong to Dallas Gun Club in North Texas, so I'm there at least once a week. And then what I'm typically doing is we're blessed with a handful of some really, really good shotgun clubs, um, up in this part of town, owned by some even better people. And so usually we'll go follow where there was a weekend event because targets are set a little bit harder, and then just go out there on a morning or something when there's less people and just, work various targets or various stands or, whatever it may be. But I would say in the typical week, I'm shooting a minimum of um, 200 shells twice a week. And then a lot of times, if I'm really serious about that particular practice, it's not uncommon to, burn through 400 or 500 shells. One of the advantages of taking lessons from Dan when I first got started is he's known to put a ton of shells through your gun, so you build up some stamina, and to shoot 500 600 in one outing. It tires you out, but it takes about that many to really wear you down. Um, and then the other thing though is I've been shooting less, meaning I used to shoot 3 or 4 days a week, to the extent I could get out for a couple of hours. One of the benefits of my business is not only owning it, but the nature of the business is that the hours are fairly flexible. Um, and so you can usually find an hour or two to sneak away and go do something like practice. But what I've found is that I've cut that down from about 3 or 4 days a week down to, no more than 2 days a week, because I am working on these other elements. And so what I'm realizing is that, yes, shooting and mechanics are critically important. And I especially need to continue to work on all those things at the stage of my game. But over and above, I can also be practicing, when I'm at home, just with visualization, meditation, working on things like my gun mount,
Hmm.
whatever it may be, and spending less time on the range. And I've been very, very curious to see what the impact would be on my scores. And while they're not going up as quickly as I would want them, which is typical probably of anybody, you want the results faster than we get them. The scores have not gone down as a result of that. And so it'll be interesting to see as we move through, the end of this year. We have the South Central Regional coming up at Defender Outdoors in Fort Worth. That should be an awesome event, like 1,000 shooters in North Texas for that. And then after that, the next big shoot will be the Nationals. And so very, very interested to see how I perform at both of those events, because it feels like I have practiced the mechanics of the game a lot less than I historically have, but the mental side of it has replaced that. And, I definitely, there's not a day that I show up at the range where I'm not having fun, meaning I'm not even
Mm,
close to being burnt out. And I think Anthony even said that in his podcast. There's an element of you can over practice, right? And so I've tried to be conscious of that, which is I don't want to over practice um, the mechanical side of the game, especially at the expense of the mental side of the game. But then just overall, you know, can I shoot better if I'm not worrying about the mechanics so much? Because with golf, that's what I did. I mean, I would spend
mm,
hours a day on the driving range,
mhm.
and I just pured my swing. And like I said, I was a scratch golfer on the driving range, but I could never take it to the course. And what I probably would have been better off doing was spending 3 less days on the driving range and going out and playing a couple of holes or even 9 holes or 3 holes or
Mm.
18 holes. I probably would have been a much better golfer than just striping it on the driving range.
Right, right. I gotcha. You had mentioned the having fun element. Um, so, two parts to this question. One is, have you ever been out there, and I'm sure this would be in the past, not recently, but have you ever been out there and just felt like quitting because you were just performing so horribly? And then, what are your beliefs around that fun element? How important do you think it is to have fun, and is that tied into your peak performance?
Absolutely. So the fun component of it is that if you're in a better frame of mind, there's no doubt when I look at the results, they're much more positive when you're thinking that way than when you're frustrated or stressed, or if I remember one time I was getting ready to go shoot at Greater Houston for an event, and unfortunately I got involved in a business call, which wasn't very positive. It was with
Mm,
one of our vendors who wasn't meeting expectations, let alone exceeding them. And it was a horrible, horrible phone call. And for those that know me, I don't really get that upset about a lot of stuff. I'm very passionate about the things I'm passionate about and competitive, but I'm not you know, not a lot of angry outbursts, but this phone call got me to that place. And then I went and tried to shoot thereafter, and it was horrible. And I was like, okay, well, that's the antithesis of the state that I'm looking for.
mhm,
So the whole, having fun and being competitive, but being lighthearted, it's a very fine balance. But if you can get to that place, you're going to perform. At least I know I am. Much much better when I don't take myself so seriously, but I'm there. I'm present. I'm competing. Um, but it doesn't have to be perfect. The birds just have to break. And Anthony taught me that too one time, which was pretty cool. We were breaking targets, and I was getting frustrated because they weren't disintegrating, right? And he's like, I was like, what did I do wrong? The bird broke, and I asked him. I said, what did I do wrong on that? He's like, buddy, we're not grading breaks, right? The thing broke.
yeah.
So if you want to break it harder, do something better. But you broke the bird, for God's sakes. Be
Right.
happy. And so I think we can take ourselves way too seriously. Like when we're
Mm,
not dustballing stuff, we're like, oh my God, I'm shooting horribly. There are X's on the card. Be thankful and move to the next stand.
right.
Um, so that's a huge, huge part of it. And then the other part of it, though, is I think for me, the quitting part, I've really never thought about quitting because I'm not even close to where I want to be and what I want to accomplish, with this as a sport. And for me, it's a hobby. I don't make a living by any means doing
Mhm.
this. In fact, quite the opposite. It's an expense, but a very, very enjoyable hobby that I've developed, that I'm very, very competitive about. So it's just a matter of keeping that in balance, meaning that, if I'm not performing well, and let's say my family's not happy because I'm gone for another 4-day tournament,
Mhm.
well, then everybody's losing. It's like, okay, well, people are unhappy at home because you're gone all the time or you're practicing all the time, and then you're out here and you're shooting, let's say worst case scenario like a 77 or something like that, and you're
Mhm.
like, what the hell am I doing? is this worth it? It's
Right.
no fun shooting 77, and it's no fun everybody being mad that you're gone. And so what I'm trying to do is to continuously work to find that balance, which is, okay, how can I become better? And all of everything we've talked about today is significantly increase those scores.
Hmm.
And then how can I, then feel better about what I'm doing, which makes me a happier person, which makes me a better husband, makes me a better father. And again, trying to find a balance of how much I'm gone, how much I'm home. And for me, it's worked out to where every year I've tried to, as of late, pick three regionals and maybe pick two of those three regionals that I'll go to, mix in the US Open and then nationals. Because it's in San Antonio, I actually started that shooting that before I ever shot any of the regionals because it was
Hmm.
close. And so I probably have less passion about the national championship these days than I do the regionals. And part of that too is just, as anybody who's gone to nationals knows, the experience in San Antonio isn't always perfect, and that's unfortunate. I wish that city were a lot more enjoyable
Hmm.
than it actually is. But all that said, if I could find, two of the regionals, mix in the US Open, and then, maybe like a Browning Briley or something like that. So four bigger tournaments a year, that's enough to keep my juices flowing and keep me interested in the game to be competitive, but not away from home so much that, I've got a horrible marriage and, my kids don't know who I am and they don't want to spend any time with me, etc. And so, that's become a big, big part of it and trying to manage that component of not wanting to quit, not getting to that point. But
Right.
no, I'm not there yet. I've not gotten to the point where I've ever thrown a shotgun, an unloaded shotgun. I don't throw hulls into the trash can, and get super pissed off and all that kind of stuff. Because I know that if I miss, it's on me. It's that I didn't do something that I could have done better, and being frustrated isn't going to get a better result. It's figuring out what didn't you do.
Right. So, what would you say your shooting goals are in the next 5, 10 years? Like, where are you heading?
So great question. So for me, I definitely want to win. The local Saturday or Sunday shoots. We have some really good weekend warriors around here who are pretty darn good shots. And so they historically have taken in the local events. And so, one of my goals is to become competitive in that space to where, when I show up at these local events here, people go from, he's a nice guy who, hopefully they say he's a nice guy, he's a nice guy who likes to shoot and he's decent, to, you know okay, he's actually got some game and somebody who can compete, with me for the HOA. So that's the first time I've ever said that publicly, right? So I'm going to get a lot of people who are going to be like, oh, so you're coming for me, and I am absolutely coming for them. And then,
Nice.
my goal would be, for sure, in a regional event, in the main, to be able in veteran class, to finish top 10. We'll start there. But there's some good names in that class, right? So Mike Wilgus is now a veteran, and, you know, um, you've had a ton of people in that space, but Wendell Cherry is now a veteran. And so, if I could finish, we'll start top 10 at a major shoot, work our way into top five, and then, maybe be bold enough one day to think that, depending on the event, I might be able to hold my own against, some of those other folks.
Nice.
And it's been enjoyable because I've been a lot closer, to some of those folks that I never thought I would even be in the same universe with, as of late. And so slowly but surely and very methodically, I'm just making my way to be competitive with those folks who are super sweet. I mean, everybody I mentioned, whether it's Wendell or Mike Wilgus, others I haven't, mentioned, are some of the nicest people I've ever met. And their families are great. Um, Love all of the Wilguses, and, so that would be very rewarding if I could see my name above some of those on the leaderboard.
I love it. I look forward to that.
Very cool.
What's the like one piece of advice or magic pill or wisdom that you would pass on to other shooters?
The first one is there's no magic pill. It's a lot of hard work and discipline and have fun along the way. And then, the other is, and we've heard it from other people. Again, Anthony, I think, said it in his podcast, would be balance. And I think the longer that I live, whether it's work, whether it's family, whether it's hobbies, in that regard, when you get out of balance, you may perform a little bit better for a short period of time, but I found that it's not sustainable. And so if you want sustained long-term performance, and I look at Anthony as somebody like that, right? He started winning stuff when he was 15, 16 years old at a national level, and the guy's 40 now. So for 24 years, he's competed pretty effectively at the head of the pack. One of the hardest working guys I've ever met in my life. I mean, just the days that he puts in, it's tiring to think about it, let alone to do it. But yet, I know that his shooting is really important to him. I know his family is even more important to him. His family's business at the range, and then also with the fishing boat, critically important to him. That's actually served as a role model for me, that if that guy can find balance and compete that well,
Mm.
that maybe finding balance has something to do with competing that well. Um, so I would encourage everybody not to seek a magic pill, but to get involved with folks like yourself and really understand our brains and how they work, and put in a lot of hard work and look to find balance. If you're not enjoyable to be around, either in the sport or out of the sport, you're probably not going to be performing at your peak because you're out of balance. And that's why people don't want to spend time with
Nice. That's some good advice.
you. All right.
Well, if people want a little taste or a lot of taste of what you're experiencing, they can learn about it on my website, dawngrant.com. And there's a page just for clay shooters. So there's a free webinar that gives lots of info, and they can be a free consultation. So I think Dan is a great testament to how important the mind game is on top of everything else. And any last words, Dan?
Simply thank you, meaning that, again, I feel privileged to have met you. I came very selfishly with a goal of improving scores and winning, and have now since developed a friendship, and truly somebody that I think is invested in, Dan Lengyel becoming the best version of himself. That may include shooting, but just the best version of me. And so I'm thankful for that. So thank you.
You're so welcome. I look forward to seeing your name at the top of these
All right.
major events.
Going to keep working at it. That's one thing I'm never giving up, I can promise you.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining me, Dan.
You have a blessed day.
Thank you for joining us on Clay Mastermind with Dawn Grant. Mental excellence and industry insights. Brought to you by the Clay Lab. We hope you found today's episode inspiring and informative. Remember, mastering the mental game is key to unlocking your full potential on the course. And through our conversations with industry leaders, we aim to provide you with valuable insights into the world of clay shooting. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow, rate, and share it. For more insights, training tips, and updates on upcoming events, Dawn Grant and Amelia Shotgun Sports are on all social media platforms. Go to dawngrant.com and come shoot at Amelia Shotgun Sports. Stay focused, stay driven, and keep pushing your limits. Until next time, Dawn wishes you success and happiness on your journey to peak performance and industry mastery.